Ominous drums echo. Marble pillars crumble in slow motion. A woman's shadow dances behind a silk curtain. Narrator, Vo. They were locked away from the world, hidden behind golden gates, velvet curtains, and 1,000 secrets. They didn't hold swords, but they shaped wars. They weren't queens, but some ruled empires from the inside. And in palaces across history, their stories were whispered, erased, or buried entirely. These are the secret lives of imperial mistresses, the women who were both prized and imprisoned. You've heard of Cleopatra, you've heard of Marie Antoinette, but history's most dangerous women often didn't have names carved in stone. Instead, they were tucked behind the throne-manipulating dynasties through pillow talk, ambition, and carefully timed silence. And the role of the concubine wasn't just a local tradition. It was practically an international institution. From the gold-covered tombs of Egypt to the candlelit palaces of the Ottoman sultans, from Mesopotamian ziggurats to the marble villas of ancient Greece, and deep within the labyrinthine walls of China's forbidden city, concubines existed everywhere, not by accident, but by design. These weren't random side romances, they were part of the machinery of empire. You can still see their legacy in crumbling frescoes and delicate silk scrolls. In Egyptian hieroglyphs, women are depicted standing slightly behind the pharaoh close, but never equal. In ancient Greek pottery, they're lounging in symposiums, pouring wine while politicians debated war. Chinese brush paintings show them surrounded by blossoms, music, and tigers on leashes. And in Ottoman miniatures, they appear with blank expressions, frozen in the perfection expected of them. But what actually was a concubine? That's where it gets messy. In many ancient societies, they weren't wives, but they weren't quite servants either. They were unofficial partners, sexual companions, symbols of a man's wealth, and sometimes pawns on a very deadly chessboard. In a world where fertility determined power, concubines were backup wombs, in case the queen didn't deliver. A ruler with no heir was a weak ruler, and concubines were often the insurance policy. Legally, things were a nightmare. Unlike wives, concubines often had no dowries, and their children weren't always legitimate. They lived in luxury, but with very little control. Think 5-star prison. Their fates depended on their standing with the ruler and how jealous the official wife was. Take an old letter found from the reign of Pharaoh Menenhotep III. The guy literally sends a diplomatic message requesting a shipment of concubines from a neighboring kingdom. No names, no ceremony. Just a polite royal version of send girls. And yet, even in that transactional tone, you can sense the political weight behind it. Concubines were currency. But no empire turned the art of concubinage into a full-blown science, quite like ancient China. If Egypt had the passion, and the Ottomans had the flair, China had paperwork. Here, the palace maintained a rigid hierarchy of women, each with specific ranks, privileges, and titles. From the Empress Dowager down to the maid who maybe brushed the emperor's sleeve once by accident, everything was catalogued. Nothing was casual. The selection process was brutal. Young girls from noble families were presented in what was basically a royal beauty contest, complete with inspection rituals, background checks, and portrait reviews. If selected, they were given silk uniforms, new names, and a spot in the grand theater of palace politics. During the Qing dynasty, Manchu rules meant every move was monitored. Even your posture could be reported. Some concubines were trained in music, others in literature, others in simply existing perfectly. And inside the Forbidden City, surrounded by jade, gold, and perfumed lanterns, they waited. On the surface, it was paradise. But every luxury had strings attached. A missed cue, a political rumor, or just a bad mood from the emperor ran to concubine could be demoted, exiled, or worse, forgotten entirely. Still, a few managed the impossible. They rose, quietly, strategically, and one of them, well, she didn't just survive the system, she broke it. History tends to forget faces like Lin Huayan. mostly because they weren't supposed to matter. She wasn't born royal. She didn't wield a sword. But her face, it nearly changed the balance of power in ancient China. According to legend, Huayan was selected as a palace concubine after her painted portrait was mysteriously swapped with another girl's own who actually resembled a plum with eyes. When the emperor realized the switch, he was furious until he met Huayan in person. The rest? An arranged marriage to a barbarian chief at the edge of the empire. Political exile in the name of peace. She wasn't just decoration, she became a living treaty. But if Huayan was diplomacy, Lady Wei Sheng was destruction. Originally a low-ranking concubine to the Tang emperor, Wei didn't stop at influence as she took the throne, not beside the emperor, instead of him. Through whisper campaigns, clever alliances, and a suspicious number of conveniently timed illnesses in her rivals, she became the only woman in Chinese history to officially rule as emperor. Wei Sheng rewrote court politics, rewrote Buddhism, and might have poisoned a duke or two before breakfast. Her reign was brutal, brilliant, and absolutely unforgettable. And yet, this wasn't just a Chinese phenomenon. Women like this existed across the ancient world, slipping through the cracks of rigid systems and rewriting their destinies. Take the case of Queen Hatuya of the Hittite Empire. She began her palace life as a concubine, essentially a footnote in a royal treaty. But somehow, she climbed to queenhood. Hatuya negotiated treaties, advised kings, and handled diplomacy like she was born to it. She once penned a letter to the Pharaoh of Egypt that historians still argue about today, half love note, half geopolitical chess move. And then there was Nahira, a concubine who bent the Ottoman Empire. She arrived in the Topkapi Palace as a gift/hostage from a rival kingdom. But Nahira didn't just sit quietly in silk robes. She studied languages, made allies with palace eunuchs, seduced the Sultanate with charm, but with conversation. Eventually, she became his legal wife, an unprecedented move, and bore his heir. From that point on, she didn't just influence the empire's future, she was the empire's future. Ministers came to her first, foreign diplomats learned her name, and more than one execution order allegedly had her handwriting on it. But daily life for most concubines wasn't that glamorous or that stable. Inside the palace, their routines were tightly regulated. Wake at dawn, bathe in rosewater, attend art lessons, music classes, and etiquette drills, and always, always be ready for inspection. Jealousy simmered constantly, whisper networks thrived, and while some plotted for attention, others just tried to survive the endless waiting. And if the emperor's interest faded, that's when the real limbo began. Older concubines, those who never gained status, faced three paths: exile to a religious retreat, reassignment as palace staff, or a quiet, forgotten existence in the back halls. No more silk, no more music, just echoes of what could have been. Even the eunuchs, those infamous guardians of the harem, played dangerous political games. They controlled access to the emperor, traded secrets, and sometimes aligned with concubines to push personal agendas. The harem wasn't just a space of luxury, it was a minefield of ambition. Because inside every palace, power was never far away. Concubines weren't just ornaments, they were levers. Influence didn't come through public speeches. It came from private rooms, shared meals, and the quiet manipulation of a ruler's ear. And the stakes? Immense. A concubine who gave birth to a son suddenly had the potential to shape the future of the entire empire. Mothers of heirs received new titles, estates, and armies of servants, but they also became targets. Other factions saw them as threats. Poisonings, exiles, staged scandalous was all part of the game. More than one succession crisis began not on the battlefield, but in the emperor's bedroom. Because in empires built by men, it was often the women behind them who set everything in motion. They say a picture is worth 1,000 words, but in the imperial courts of the past, a painting could be worth a life. In one Qing dynasty scroll, a woman lounges beneath a willow tree, her silk robe slipping deliberately off one shoulder. She looks directly at the viewer, not shy, not submissive, just still. Her name was Consort Mei Lin, and the painter? Not a court artist, but allegedly a forbidden lover who later vanished from all records. That painting was found sealed inside his tomb, beneath a layer of dust and silence. In another Ottoman miniature, a eunuch stands at the entrance of the imperial harem, half-shadowed, half-smirking. There's a legend tied to these guards that they weren't entirely loyal to the sultans. Some say they operated their own secret network within the palace, funneling messages between concubines and scheming noblemen, acting less like guardians and more like puppet masters in silk robes. And then there's the story of Lady Nahira from Egypt, a concubine who played the long game. She bore a son in near total obscurity. Her rivals laughed her out of the main courtyard. She was forgotten for years, until her son, against all odds, was declared heir. That son became Pharaoh Tuthen-Ra IV, and Nahira? She emerged from the shadows not just as a mother but as the power behind the throne. Her fresco now stands in the tomb of the boy she raised, her figure just slightly larger than Hisa quiet artistic rebellion against every rule. But like all systems born of absolute power, concubinage didn't last forever. Modernization swept through ancient empires like a storm, knocking down traditions that once seemed unshakable. In China, the institution of concubinage was officially abolished in 1949, when new laws finally banned polygamy and declared all wives and women equal in legal standing. In the Ottoman Empire, the harem culture faded out with the fall of the sultans. Slowly, the palaces emptied. Today, the word concubine often comes with scandal attached. But history is finally revisiting their stories not as footnotes to men, but as figures of agency, survival, and sometimes subtle rebellion. Scholars are digging deeper, restoring names and faces to those long buried under dynasties and dust. Because for centuries, these women walked the halls of power in silence. No statues, no speeches, no official titles. But their shadows still stretch across every empire they touched. They were once called ornaments, distractions, background characters in the dramas of kings. But now, as we uncover their stories, it's becoming clear they were never in the background. They were the ones writing the script. Music swells. Ancient portraits fade into black. Credits roll over the echo of distant footsteps on marble.